Good morning. Welcome back to part 3 of Sleeping Beauty. This is where it gets even more interesting than it's been up until this point, right? The story we initially talked about, the opening, where once again the king and queen have problems having a baby. And then once they do, they're quite excited. They have to wait a year, but then the king wants to celebrate by having a big party. But there are 13 wise women and only 12 plates, so one needs to be excluded. So we talked before about what does that 13th wise woman who was excluded actually represent in the psyche, and how that really is relevant to the culture's perception of emotions and ways of being that the culture deems inappropriate for the feminine women. And so she curses the young baby at that point and at the celebration, because the other 11 other wise women give her all kinds of blessings of, sweetness and happiness, sugar and light and all those things. And then she comes in and says at 15 she will prick her finger on a spindle and die. Then the 13th or the 12th wise woman comes in because she hasn't blessed her yet, and she says, I can't take this curse away, but I can soften it. And so instead of dying, she's going to fall asleep for 100 years. So welcome to our culture. Right? How long has the feminine been asleep? Well, more than 100 years. So what's so important about this particular moment in the story, one of the things that's so important about it, is that it's kind of like a point of, like, are we going to make it or aren't we going to make it? And so historically what you see in a lot of these fairy tales is the idea of not being generative is that at this critical point it's not successfully traversed. So there's this movement back into the unconscious. If you look at, and then that means there's no forward progression at this point. There's kind of this point where it just doesn't get crossed successfully. If you look at our culture, what's so fascinating is that we are in that time. It's evident. We've been talking about the emergence of the feminine, and people have been talking about this for a while. But what's so evident right now, which I hadn't ever seen before as clearly as you can see now, is that resistance, right? You see this really clearly in Cinderella, where this emergence is a tricky time. And what we see in the culture is the blowback, like what's happened with the abortion rights in women's bodies, and so it's like to take it more abstractly and not so much literally, but to see that there's this point culturally where there's this movement of the feminine coming out of the unconscious, that's been unaware of the loss of this feminine for so long. For some people, for a lot of people like Jung and stuff like that, he was aware of it. He's was alive in the 1800s to the 1900s. So this point of moving out, which I didn't expect to see so evidently in the culture, was the pushback. So there's someone who's running for governor that wants to take away women's right to vote. And why women? It's so, why all this movement towards controlling the feminine, right? The only reason is there's fear. And so that's why it was done initially in the first place, millennia ago, thousands of years ago. So we're kind of in that place again where she's moving out, and then there's this pushback. This is one of the reasons it's so critical for us to find this in ourselves and to actually see how to traverse this moment and to do it successfully personally, because we are the collective. And the more that we are able to successfully traverse this, the more it changes energetically the dynamic that's happening in the culture. So, this is really important in terms of us realizing in ourselves the situation that we're in and how we're participants. Whether you're marching on the streets or at home and you're doing this work, this is actually how it will change. This inner work and seeing the shadow aspects, which we talked about, which the 13th wise woman represents. That shadow aspect has to be integrated, and it's not about blaming and looking out. Not that there doesn't come this moment where once the shadow is integrated, that there may be an inspired kind of guidance to take action and go out into the world and play some part in what's happening. But also the guidance can appear so subtle that it doesn't initially feel like it's a participation in a response to what's happening. So what do I mean by that? It could be that you're then guided to write music. And that would seem like, well, that's not doing, that's not out in the streets protesting. But it's understanding that we're all playing some part in the emergence of something new. And so this story, again, is so important to talking to this particular moment. So in the story, the king wants to control everything, right? Once that 13th wise woman curses his daughter, he's like, fine, get rid of every spindle in the kingdom, except that as the ego, we can't control the situation. We want to, we'd like to, but that's not successful. It's not the way to protect. This is like the old way of protection, is controlling. And right, we can, again, looking out into the world, you can easily see that this is the way some rulers in some countries believe that protection comes, right, through control of outer situations. So what's so cool about the story and about life is that there is an intervention. Fate intervenes. And what that means is that we can't control things when there is this deeper impulse that's working through us to grow and to emerge. And fate then intervenes to break the pattern. So this is a gift, because this is life stepping in and saying, okay, the king and queen have not been able to be generative. They haven't been able to be generative for a long time. And so that means they're caught in a pattern. So then the new feminine comes along and she can get caught in the pattern too, which we can see in like Cinderella, where the stepsisters become just like the stepmother, right? So that's the pattern playing out. Cinderella then represents the breaking of the pattern. So in a way, it would be like if you incarnate into a family which is in a pattern, you are the pattern breaker. You are the one that's here to break the pattern. Because if you're sitting here listening to this, if you know, then if you're interested in these things, then you can see that you are the one to break the pattern in your family, in your lineage. And again, it's so important because that breaking of that pattern goes into the collective. So as I've talked before, the fairy tales represent patterns. It's like you're born into a particular story, and that story resonates with you in a way that, say, astrology does. You may look at your astrology and you're a Capricorn and you read Capricorn and you think, oh my gosh, like this totally is what I'm like. And like most Capricorns I know are just like this. And it's the same with the fairy tales. It's that pattern. It has a pattern of similarity. We get this idea like we're so unique and we're so different. But in a way, to even look at that, like, how is that possible that just being born in a particular month, in a particular part of a month, that you would somehow resonate with the other people who are born in that month, right? There must be some kind of larger something that's happening here that puts us into these places, into these situations. So it's like you were born to break the pattern, and you were born at a specific time to specific parents, and you know, they talk about karma, and that karma is, you know, you're a bad person, so you end up in a bad situation. But what I believe is you are the strongest person to go into that situation. So I believe before you incarnate, you're looking at the lineage of your parents, your mother and your father, and you're saying, okay, I think I'm strong enough. I think I can do this. Send me. I'm the one that can work this out. I'm the one who can break these patterns on both sides. They come together, and I would be at that point of change. That would be you. Okay, so we're breaking the pattern. This is in the story, and this is in life. Fate is intervening. Again, if you look in the culture, it's fascinating because you can see that it's like fate has intervened over and over and over again. It's like we get to this edge, and then fate intervenes and pulls us back. So it's like something is on our side. Hopefully that continues. So the spindle we talked about, what does that represent? The goddess is associated with the spindle and like the weaving of fate. And the interesting thing about the spindle is that kind of energy is moving, but the center is like a still point. And the center is this point of like stillness and silence amidst the turning of life, we could say. So I mentioned last week, life heals, or it wounds and then it heals. In order to heal those patterns, in order to resolve those patterns, sometimes we inherit them and they're in the DNA and we don't have that experience, but sometimes we do. So on the 15th birthday, right, this is the fateful day, what happens? The king and queen are not there. Like, right? I mean, how is that possible on the one very day that they know that this is the day that fate had you know, ordained to be the critical moment, and they're not there. They went out to lunch, right? So this can be, we can see this in our own lives, right? Becoming unconscious at these moments that you might look back and be like, how could I have not seen that in that moment? It was so obvious. And we don't. Sometimes we just don't. So they're gone, which in a sense means they're unconscious in this moment. The momentous occasion, they're unconscious, and they're not like present to like, what should I be doing here? I'm not in the moment, reacting to the moment in a new way, right? This is probably how the pattern played out. They were unconscious at one of these critical pivot moments. But that's one hand. On the other hand, this is a moment where, again, fate is intervening. So they're gone. So the princess is by herself all alone in the castle. So she starts wandering around, right? And she goes up these stairs and she sees this little door she's never seen before. It has not just a key in the lock, a rusty key in the lock, right? Never used. No one ever goes there. Little door, you're thinking like, you know, Alice in Wonderland. Like, you know, I gotta bend down and she has to creep through. This is the point in the movie where you're going, don't go through the door. Don't turn the lock in the key. Don't do it. The music is all intense, right? This is the moment where it's just, okay, this is not a good idea. So what does she do? Fate intervenes. She goes through the door. And who's in there? An old woman with what? A spindle. She's fascinated. She's never seen one before, right? Because the king's gotten rid of all of them. Now, if the king hadn't done that, you might think, well, she would think, oh, it's just an old woman spinning and just walk away. But because it's this novel thing and how the light glints off the spinner, it's all fascinating and enticing. And she walks over and what is this? And out goes the finger and she touches it and falls asleep immediately, along with the entire castle. So when the feminine is in the unconscious, when the feminine sleeps, the culture sleeps. The culture isn't awake. It's not moving forward. It's in a pattern. And it's just going around and around and around and around. It's not doing anything. There's no generativity. There's no life. There's no color, right? We've seen this in other stories, how there's just this spin. So, the feminine is unconscious. Everything is like frozen in time. We say there's just like nothing really happens. Like, so we could say this is like in winter. And during this phase, whether it's personally or in the culture, there is a turning within. That's what this represents, going into the unconscious and seeing what is there. So touching that center can be a couple of things. If you've ever had this moment where you encounter the stillness and silence within yourself, it can blot out the ego. So there can be, not always, but it is possible for something like that to happen. So there is this overtaking of on one hand into a sense of something bigger than the ego. So the death of the old pattern creates the space for the new pattern to emerge. My guide said this morning, purgatory. I'm like, oh yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, right? You're not in the old anymore, and you're not in the new yet. But think about it. She's in here for 100 years. Like, when is this going to be done, right? That's what it can feel like when it's in your life. And looking at the culture, right? When's this going to be done? When are we going to move through this? So during this period, what we're looking at is one thing, what's happened here? What is it that's been left behind, rejected, that needs to be reclaimed and in the self? So there's this working through the unconscious and unconscious material in order to get to greater truth. And there's also this, with that center point, it's also spending time in that stillness and silence. That's like, you could see it as meditation or just being, just allowing yourself to be without that need to achieve and progress, and kind of just like just actually immersing yourself really in the feminine. And it's critical during this phase of the process to trust and be patient with the timing. It's like understanding that there is an underlying kind of trajectory that has its seasons, right? That's what the feminine is associated with. Especially wise women would be associated with that knowing of healing and the process and birth and the cycles of the seasons, the way to grow things. They would be in tune with that. So that would be part of what's happening here, is trusting that there's a timing for everything. So the feelings are being explored, the ones that are rejected and pushed to the side: sadness, anger, rage, frustration, irritation. Then there's, especially in this phase, it can trigger feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, disappointment, loss, powerlessness, right? That can be what has happened as a result of the conditioning. The conditioning has put us in a place where these things often can come up. So the feeling of it being ignored, unvalued. So you can be really successful in the culture, like, but the feminine isn't fully being honored, and so or life may not be aligned fully with the feminine in a way that feels nourishing and satisfying and fulfilling. So looking at unworthy or unloved, like all of these things that are um, often in the unconscious, don't really want to admit them, that these things are present. So the emotions during this phase can be really strong. It can be daunting to go into that, but just knowing that you're, the old saying, you're not going to get anything you can't handle, you totally can handle it. You've got this. I mean, it's possible. Of course, get help if you find yourself completely overwhelmed. But in general, it's usually parsed out in such a way that we actually can handle it. So it's really, in a lot of ways, about accepting and not judging. Judging comes from that mind, that in analytical kind of, this is not good, but it's all good. It's all working towards your growth. So it's understanding that this is here to help me. How can it help me? And how do I move through it? So it's like which I've talked about before, jealousy. In jealousy, the culture deems as a bad thing, something, but jealousy isn't a bad thing because it tells you probably this is something that you really want and believe you can't have. So it's giving you information. So looking at everything is giving me information to help me resolve something in myself, helping me to move forward. Then we can understand. And at this point, what we're looking at is assessing what is mine, what is inherited. In some ways, it doesn't matter, but in some ways, it's beginning to parse out because there's this greater understanding of who I am and who others are. And so it's beginning to become more aware of what is mine. Now, of course, we're at one level all connected. So, we're going to get everybody's everything at times, or we're open to everybody's everything. So the hedge grows up around the castle, right? The king and queen come home, they fall asleep too. So the hedge grows up around the whole castle for 100 years. So there's this protection happening because this is a vulnerable phase. It's like the caterpillar in the chrysalis, right? It's a moment of vulnerability. And so that chrysalis is the protection. It's like that hedge around the castle, which we will have. I mean, I can't tell you how many times like these crazy things have happened to me where, like, once we were sitting at a light, my partner, he was driving and I was in the passenger seat, and all of a sudden, I didn't do anything, but my whole body just went like that, and we were hit from behind. Like, didn't happen to my partner, it happened to me. And there was like no word like relax or nothing like that, but somehow some message got to my body without my conscious mind receiving it that was like relax, and then we got hit. And yeah, of course I was perfectly fine because I was relaxed when we were hit. I was completely relaxed, so I didn't even have a sore muscle or anything. And this has happened at other times too, where I could look back on a situation and be able to see like, oh man, look at how that happened so that I was protected. Like it's crazy how many, and I can tell you, I could keep you here all day telling you stories like this. Like, so it's really, if you look at your own life, you'll be able to see like, look at how this has happened again and again and again. So that protection is around us when we're doing this work. So it's a time of isolation. It's beyond your control, right? There's nothing she could do about it. And that's often what happens to us when we're in this phase is there's nothing we can do about it, no matter how hard you try, no matter what you do. There's no way to get beyond this into right what the ego thinks it should be. Ego is in the back seat. It's not in the driver's seat at this point. There is nothing you can do about it if that's where you are. So it's just allowing that isolation and trusting it, moving through whatever comes up. And it, dreams are so very helpful through all of this, especially because there can be so much limitation in terms of what's coming in from the outer world, and understanding that nothing is wrong. Everything is okay. It's unfolding perfectly. Timing is perfect. So the king tried to control and protect. That's the old way. using control as a way to protect, right? This is understanding there is protection and we don't need to control it, right? In that moment when the car got hit, I didn't know. I didn't know that was going to happen, so I didn't know what to do. Now protection is there. So the new way is we are safe. We are safe. It's retraining your nervous system. I'm safe. Everything is okay. And understanding that I don't need to control in order to be safe. So this is important to the collective because we have to change ourselves to change the collective. Like I said, we want to break the old rules in the conditioning in order to become empowered, and we don't want to conform to things that aren't true. So we're kind of discerning and parsing all of this during this phase. We're going to challenge old paradigms, and we're going to live differently than accepted ways. This is why all of this is so important, to know who we are, to be able to stand in a new way of being that's against the culture. It's like the culture is this, river that's rapidly flowing, and you're standing and unmoving as this crazy river flows. It's that allowing and trusting. You're going to trust in this space of what you're getting, and the universe usually will come in and reinforce what you're already getting, so that you kind of have this sense of like, okay, I'm on track. So you're going to see, know, and embody the truth of yourself in the world, which is very different than what the culture says and very different from what the conditioning has been that's told you about who you are and how the world works. So you're going to follow the inner voice, right? Honoring the heart and soul and spending time doing what you love. My guides talk about this all the time, how important this is and how critical it is to the process. So the sleeping princess is learning in this phase to not react to the outer, being excluded, ignored, and rejected by others. Initially, this can be a huge trigger, which absolutely is so overpowering. We saw like with the 13th wise woman, that's so overpowering that there's like zero control. But over time, that moving through that, there is an understanding more and more, right? The culture isn't going to see what it can't see. It's not going to validate what it can't see. So it's understanding that if you're in this place of being so different, there could be a swath that doesn't see and doesn't understand and can't validate. And that becomes okay because you understand that you're in the process of moving into this new paradigm, and that's probably going to come along with it. So the path is different than the culture's path, and that's why there could be this reaction. So it's the ability to relax, feel safe, and let go of control. Just all is well. Embodying wholeness. That's happening right now too. So it's trusting that needs are always being met, right? Again, this is so out of the culture, which is go, 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 pursue. I got to survive. I've got to, do this and this and this to survive. And so I watched Arrival again last night, which I wrote a blog about. If you read that, you saw how amazing that friggin' movie is. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. And what's so beautiful about it is that the language is out of duality. And essentially, that's what the fairy tales are pointing to, a language that's outside of duality. And one of the key lines I felt in the movie is when they say, when you learn a new language, you're rewiring your brain. That's what the fairy tales are doing. They're taking us into this new paradigm that has words that are outside of duality. Wholeness is a consciousness. There is no not whole. Like that's just not true, because you're inherently whole. You can think that you're not, you can believe that you're not, but it's just not true. It's like the ego. You can think you're the ego. You can think about that your entire life. You can be 9 years old on your deathbed and think you're the ego. It doesn't mean it's true, because it isn't. And it's like love. People can say the opposite of love has no opposite. At a deeper level, there is no opposite to love. So when you are in and embodying and living these particular ways of being They don't have opposites. So it's understanding your true nature and living from your true nature. And that is a different language, because you talk about wholeness, but you don't talk about not whole, because there isn't any not whole. So you're living and you're rewiring your brain, and you're in a new place. And for in the story, what happens is when she enters into this unitary language, time always also ceases to exist. So there's a timelessness in that all things happen at once. And if you really, what I had thought was, this is so parallel with dreams, because in dreams, they're not bound by time. Your dreams know the future, and they're preparing you for the future. So they must be out of time, unlike us, which feels like we are in time. Not always, but a lot of the time. So she's understanding that all is unfolding for her benefit and life is on her side. She allows and just receives whatever shows up. So this is so interesting. So what happens now? She's asleep for 100 years. A prince comes along, and there's an old man, and he tells him this story about this beautiful princess who lives in this or is asleep in this castle that's protected by a hedge. Now, this not the first time this has happened. This has happened over and over and over again. But whenever the princes in the past have tried to get through the hedge, they've been caught in the briars, and they've not had a very happy death. It was not very pleasant. So that the old man tells him this, like they've died in the past, like they've all died trying to get through. But this prince doesn't care. I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. So in the past, whenever they tried to come through and they died, that meant it wasn't time yet. That 100 years wasn't up yet. It was too early. The princess wasn't ready. It wasn't the right time. There was more healing needed, more awareness needed to be gained. He learns from the past failures, and he doesn't give up, and he persists. So it's almost like this is the same prince, like over and over again, just like we talked about the generativity, right? Over and over again. So whenever this critical point came in the past, there was failure. That means there was no generativity. The prince died. But he doesn't give up, which is also helpful, because we saw this again with Cinderella, right? Where she doesn't, there's just this not giving up. First goes out the first stepsister, that's not it. Then the second stepsister goes out, and that's not it. And then the Cinderella comes out. Of course, 3 times is the charm, and that time is successful. So we're in that phase of what looks like this attempt to move through this critical point. But if it's not time yet, it's not time yet. And like we said with the king, there's nothing you can do about it. But he keeps trying. So he's helping, in essence, not he, but the energy. The energy of the masculine is to help the princess emerge from the unconscious. So his fearlessness easily parts the hedge, and he just goes through. Like, right? The right time. It's so easy. You're like, how could that not have happened before? In this moment, it's so easy. This is crazy. I tried so many times, and he died so many times, and this time it's just like the path is open. He's decisive. He's determined. He knows what he wants, and he goes for it. That fearlessness can part the ways. Like that direction, that directive, like, I know it. I'm going to do it. It's going to be right this time. So in essence, too, the princess feels safe enough to allow that energy and to be able to emerge. So what was rejected has been seen, accepted, and is now valued. And has, because of that, it's been transformed. So that's accepting all of ourselves, and don't care what others think or believe. People are going to project anyway. So it's like, this is them. That's why this is so important to understand this discernment between theirs and mine. This is theirs. I'm me. I'm going to be me. I'm rooted and grounded in myself in such a way that I am immune to their projections. They can project all day long. It doesn't bother me because it's not me. So you can express freely. We talked about this, how this expression was an important aspect of this. So that is speaking up, speaking the truth, even though, right, we talked about the 13th wise woman speaking to the king. I mean, if you think about that in kind of a literal sense, that would be unheard of to speak to the king, speak up to the king, to defy the king, to curse his daughter. I mean, you have to be some pretty good cojones to be doing that kind of thing. So this is where she is now. She's integrated this 13th wise woman, and now she has that power to speak freely. She won't remain silent. She won't be passive, small, and good. All those good little sugar and spice things. She's free now and empowered. That's the only reason he could come in. So it's not like he's rescuing her, he's saving her, but she has reached the point in consciousness to allow him to come in. Not let him, allow in order to emerge. So he isn't him, he is that energy to come in. And so she feels safe enough to emerge. She's done all the work. All he did was walk through the hedge. I mean, he did die a few times trying, but yeah, in general, it's because of her that allows this union to take place. So he comes in at the exact right time to emerge, for her to emerge. She's now responsible for her life. She's able to see like action result, like this is working. She can act on her own behalf. She has that innate wholeness, and she's understood with the wisdom inherent in each moment of the situation. So when she wakes up, because he goes in, he gets through the hedge, he walks up the stairs, he goes through the little door, and he sees the sleeping princess, and he gives her a kiss, and she wakes up. Not only does she wake up, the whole castle wakes up. The whole culture wakes up. So it's understanding at this point the value of the feminine. And now all the groundwork has been laid in the psyche, personally and collectively, for the feminine to fully come out as an equal partner, because that union doesn't happen until true union doesn't happen until there's equality. So that in the psyche there has to be this balance and this equality, that there is equal value in both energies. There's value in the being and the inner life, and there's value in the doing in the outer life. And the idea is these two things have to be in balance for that union to occur. This happens over and over again in the stories. You see this. Like, how does she unite with a often it's depicted as a masculine energy that's the next level, right? Because the father is at this level and the spiritual masculine, let's say, is at this level. So there's this movement from the father level of consciousness, which is typically very materialistic, to the spiritual in a way that's a union of the both. There's this, the not spiritual to like, okay, get out of physical form, but the feminine already represents the physical form. So or the soul. So the spirit now comes down, and there's this union with these two. And when that happens, it's called the sacred marriage. Yeah. So hopefully you see how just fascinating and amazing this is, and how so important to the emergence of the feminine in our culture right now. What is happening? It's a time where we all are participating, whether you're owning the shadow and transforming consciousness, or whether you have been given some instructions from the universe to do something else. Whatever it is, it has to be from a place of empowerment and understanding that, may ruffle a few feathers along the way if you're doing it different. And this path is about doing it different over and over again, story after story, breaking the rules. Even in Christianity, breaking the rules, breaking the rules. You're the one. It's an adventure, I must say, and I'm so happy you joined me. I'm so happy. Thank you for watching. So I will be back again next Saturday, same time, same place. Hopefully you will be here with me. I would like to see you. Yeah, so thanks for coming. Have a great rest of your day. Oh, and happy holiday. It's a holiday. Take care.